Hi, and welcome to our discussion about BNR and how they've been evolving the brand identity of BNR with the aim of staying sharp in a changing media world. Thanks for joining us, and I thank you in advance for your patience and good humour. I should point out this has not been the plan that we would be doing our session in this format, so bear with us and let's look forward to an interesting discussion. I think the first thing I'll do is introduce my guest on my left-hand side. Sharine, would you like to say a few words, please?
Yeah, hi, I'm Sharine. I'm marketing manager of BNR. Don't know exactly which camera I should be looking at, but you will make it work. And I'd like to introduce myself based on audio to give a bit of background. As far as audio is concerned, I love to run to 80s and 90s music. I used to wake up every morning to Edwin Evers. Not in real life, but on the radio, obviously. When his morning show, I still miss that. And as far as podcasting is concerned, my favorite podcast at the moment, and of course it's BNR, is Koster en Van Dijk. It's all about media, the ins and the outs, and the juicy details. So to the audience out there, hope you listen to it.
Thank you. On my right, I have Rosie.
Hi, mijn naam is Rosie. Ik woon in Amsterdam sinds 1 augustus. Ik werk voor D8 en ik leer Nederlands, maar ik ben een beetje langzaam. So I'm going to do this in English. Yeah, and in terms of my podcast I chose, it's called Tiga's First and Last Party on Earth. I'm a big music lover, and he talks to guests about how they would plan and do if they had to play one last time on Earth, what would they do? So yeah, that's a really great podcast.
Thank you. And well, last, in terms of introductions, my name is Ross Mcdonald. I'm the Business Development Director at D8. And that's a creative design agency based in Amsterdam, Glasgow and in Hong Kong. And hopefully the reason for D8's being will come clear through the conversation alongside Sharine and our clients at BNR. My own favourite audio is a podcast not particularly interesting. It's about football, which makes me a fairly predictable Scottish man. I like football. But yeah, we'll move on. And what we thought would be useful is just to set a bit of context around D8's reason for being and the experience and understanding that we bring to the table. Rosie, would you like to touch on some of the projects and clients that D8 have worked on over the past?
Yeah. Hopefully we can see what's on the screen. Maybe not. We do have a screen here that hopefully you'll be seeing with some clients on that we work with. But just to touch on a few, we've had a relationship with the BBC over 10 years where we've worked on a number of channel rebrands for them for different stations, and also more recently a lot of podcast branding across the huge variety of shows that they have on. We work alongside Spotify and also create lots of podcast tiles for them, alongside quite a lot of live action pieces to advertise and celebrate that the work that they have on platform.
Yeah, so we think, is it right to say then that it feels like quite a good combination, D8's broad understanding of these different aspects of the media sector internationally, then with BNR obviously being very much a Dutch institution, I guess?
Yeah.
Could you, I guess, sort of following on from that, Sharine, could you maybe touch on the topic that we're here to talk about is innovation?
Yeah.
So could you give a sense of what innovation means to BNR?
Yeah. I don't know if everybody knows, but BNR was founded more or less 24 years ago, in 1998. We started off in an old student house at the Vondelstraat in Amsterdam. Hardly any money. And one of the things that we needed to do back then, and we still need to do, is figure out a way how to stand out from a massive crowd of big brands that are out there that are usually publicly funded or have bigger budgets in general. And one of my colleagues came up with a good idea to enter the flag around the microphone to stand out more on television. But because what better way is there to build your brand as through television, especially back then. So we kind of used or piggybacked on the massive amount of people that were watching television and saw our brand. And we took that a step further and we introduced the hopefully well-known yellow mic. There's one at the table, there should be one on the screen. And that yellow mic really stands out, and it also represents what we are about. We hope to be sharp and stand out from the crowd. And that really worked, as you can see on the next photo of, unfortunately he has passed, but Johan Cruyff, we still stand out from a big crowd. That worked back then. This was almost 18 years ago, a little over 18 years ago, and it still works today. So that yellow mic was really a small innovation, but it made a huge impact. And I think that's typical for what we do as Bnr, how to take something small and make it bigger because of our limitation. And I think limitations or constraints, more to put it negatively, really helps you innovate. It's a need for creativity and innovation.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you. So that idea of the longevity of innovation is really interesting. How that came to being in the early stages of the brand, and then how it still continues today. One of the other sort of main themes of Dutch Media Week, I think it's fair to say, is podcasting.
Yeah.
Would you be able to touch on the influence that podcasting had and continues to have on Bnr as an organisation?
Sure. Yeah, they're doing a marathon broadcast or recording of podcasting. I think they're recording 200 hours during this week. That's basically the average of what we do at Bnr 24/7, 365 days a year. So we know podcasting. And podcasting at Bnr started really early. The first podcast ever in the world was broadcasted 2004 by Adam Curry, who most of us know. And then half a year later, one of our specialists on innovation, innovation is a big pillar, content pillar of Bnr. And Herbert thought, okay, I want to know more about what is podcasting about. And the best way to learn is to actually do it. Mm-hmm. So he started half a year after the first podcast was launched, he started with his own podcast called The Technoloog. And that still is a live podcast. We still create that podcast, I think, every week, if I'm not mistaken. And it was a big success back then, and it still is a big success. And that was only one podcast, but we quickly evolved to putting more content out there on podcasting, and we see that on-demand is becoming more and more important. Mm-hmm. And especially if you look around, what's happening now is that podcast consumption is changing from audio only also to a visual component. And I think that's where we found each other because at Bnr we know audio really, really well, if I might toot our own horn. But the visual aspect is not what we do best. I don't know what slide is coming up now, but yeah, again, we needed help with that, and that's why we partnered up with you and your experience over the past years on visual and brand design.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting story, the way that the one particular output of podcasting has evolved over that time from being purely audio to now adding in the visual aspect as well. Is there anything, we've talked about innovation as a positive, and it always is almost an assumption that that's just a given. Innovation is positive, it's a straight line. Nobody's watching, nobody's listening, don't worry. Have you got is there anything you'd like to share that maybe when innovation hasn't quite worked so well?
I think innovation always is a rocky road. We in 2018, we thought we almost reinvented the wheel, but that in a good way. We launched Smart Radio, which was a way for our users, our audience, to listen to their own personalized radio based on their interests and on their preferences. And we got a lot of praise for that. So we got a couple of awards, a lot of media coverage, and we started working on it. And then quickly we discovered that because we service such a niche audience as Bnr, we didn't have the volume of content or the volume in audiences to feed the algorithm. So that didn't work out well. And besides volume in audience and content, we didn't have the volume of budget. Because usually, if it's a technical or development innovation that you want to create, then a lot of budget is involved. However, what we did learn is that there was a need for content creation, or there is a content overkill out there, so people want to learn or want to be helped by making the right decisions. And I think that that's also one of the learnings from that innovation. So innovation, it failed, but we learned there was a takeout. And I think that's also really important, that you look back and see, okay, what can I learn from this and how can I use that for the future? And I think that's a good example of that is what we're doing with Listen, that we recently launched as a content curator for people, that we help them find the right content for them. For our audience, who's typically a business professional, we're really helping them with Listen to find the right content, and hopefully they'll listen to it.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I think that it feels like quite a natural bridge in our conversation to move on to. You've touched quite a lot there on the requirement for visual, I guess, backup or complementary to the audio. It would be interesting to have a bit of a discussion around the point at which, moving into thinking about the brand identity, the point at which where, as an organisation, Bnr started to feel that maybe what was out there in terms of visual identity wasn't quite keeping up with the desires of being in an innovative business and also being and operating in this world of multi-channel consumers. Is there anything you can touch on about that would take us into that discussion?
Yeah. So when I started at Bnr, what I saw was really strong, and it was really, it was recognizable, it was striking, but it didn't reflect our brand values, the essence of what we are about, and that's stay sharp, that's our payoff, and that really represents what we hope to do and what our core values are. And looking at that brand identity, it was about 10, or it is about 10 years old. It's recognizable, but it doesn't meet the current requirements. So motion design, for instance, it was really strict, almost like it felt like a harness that we were stuck into. So that the constraint on that end, and then also the limited possibilities of the digital advantages that are out there. So having movement enter the playing field, and also it didn't reflect our audience, or it reflect our values and our brand identity in a bigger way. And that's why we asked for help, because again, we know audio, but from a visual point of view, we definitely needed help. And I think when we had our first chat, Rosie, I think there was chemistry is a bit of a stereotype maybe, but it felt right, and I think you can explain best what happened from there.
Yeah, of course. So when we approach anything like this, we try to keep it fairly simple, and we work on a kind of 3-step basis. So the first point is all about getting really immersed within the brand. So looking around, seeing what else is happening in the market, taking a look at everything that the brand is doing themselves, and then taking any inputs. As Sharine mentioned, the payoff, stay sharp, was a really huge inspiration for where to build that brand back up again. So we take that first of all, and having a look, I'll just see what we've got up there. Looking at the brand that Sharine's just discussed with you there, we felt, as you say, there was quite a lot there that was quite restrictive, and I think that one of the things that is necessary in the changing landscape that you're in is that the brand that you have needs to be able to flex with you and develop with you as it grows. So you want to have consistency, and I think that's one of the most important things that we can build. However, it shouldn't be restrictive, and you should be able to work with it and run with it and develop it over time in a way that feels right for you. So what we tend to do in terms of the way that a brand is pulled together is we would work on what we call a framework. We take all of the elements and we worked really collaboratively with you, had some great workshops, took lots of input from all around the business, and that's something which I think is invaluable. We want to hear as many opinions as we can on what's going on in the business, because you really get gems, I think, from talking to a variety of people around a table. So we had some great working sessions with Sharine and the team at Bnr to then really try and distill what's important for the brand. So we won't go into too much details of the final output here, because that's confidential to Sharine and the team. But what we tend to work through are 3 elements of the brand. So what do you do? The practical elements of what you do day to day. How you do it, which is really important for us as the jumping off point into the visual identity of the brand. And then underpinning all of that, the why. So we kind of tend to talk about that as like the North Star for the brand. So what gets you out of bed in the morning and what makes Bnr special? What can you really hang your hat on? And then we work through that into kind of personality and traits. And these are all things that then come together to feed into the visual identity of the brand. And luckily for us, we felt like we were in the right place quite quickly. But we've had a really open and collaborative relationship moving through the process. And it's been a really lovely journey, I think, meaning that you've had the ability to feed in at really great times and challenge us. And we also always try and approach this with a really open mind as to, ultimately, you know your brand better than we can in this short time that we get to work with it. And so, yeah, that's meant that we've had some really good conversations about how to bring it forward throughout the process.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that. It doesn't only help, this exercise and workshop didn't only help for you, I think, as good output or input for what you have been doing, but also for us internally, it worked out really well to kind of recalibrate you as a brand. So what do we stand for? What makes us tick? What is the kind of the red thread that we all need to keep in mind when we're doing what we do, whether it being marketing or being an editor or being part of the operations team or HR or the development. It really is a bigger picture than just the visual identity. So that also really helped us.
Yeah.
I think, that I can well imagine that, particularly if we do talk in specifics about some of those phrases and words that did come out through the process. It would be interesting to, well maybe you could touch on them, what kind of phrases and figures of speech emerged, and then the role that they played in the visual identity.
Yeah, there was and still is a bit of a challenge in the English versus Dutch. As you mentioned in your introduction, and it's obvious that we are Dutch. And phrasing it right in a Dutch way is you don't just translate it. It should tell more than, it's more than words, also the feeling. But I think the Cut the Crap is, that's the title of this show. And actually that's a payoff we used at Bnr a long time ago, but it's still relevant and it still says what we are about. So besides Blijf Scherp, which is our brand payoff, Cut the Crap is really boiling it down to what we stand for, and that's independent, future-focused, energetic, and it's kind of a summary of all of that.
Yeah. So Rosie, then from a design perspective, what role do words like that, and particularly as Sharine has mentioned, it's not just the words, it's also the thinking and the feeling behind them. What role do they play?
Absolutely, they play a really big part, because ultimately all of that is such good food for visual artists, for designers to really think about each element of a brand and how they can logically use those words and use, you know, energy, I think, is one of the best words to use in BNR's case, because I think that where you were visually felt quite static. And so I think one of the biggest inspirations for the designers was, okay, how do we create this pace that it feels like everybody has when we go and speak to them all in the office? And how do we really bring it to life in a much more flexible way? So yeah, looking at this, just before we touch on then what came next, a lot of what was happening within BNR was being done elsewhere as well. And I think that there has to be an individuality and a uniqueness to what you do. And yes, it's great if people then start to copy you. That's a compliment.
I don't know if we were first.
But I think that what you started to see was that a lot of the devices that were being used visually and the way that the layouts were being used were actually happening quite a lot. And so we wanted to take some elements of those, because, you know, something that we'll touch on a little bit is kind of evolution or revolution, and I think that's really important as part of this case. But yeah, we had to bring you back some of the individuality and the life that we kind of felt when we met with everybody.
Yeah.
So hopefully what we start to see on screen now is how we then start to build things. So I'm going to sneak a peek at your... there we go. Helpfully bringing us on to that slide.
Yeah, well, I think you've said there, and I'm going to coin the phrase that I think is quite fitting, that idea of innovation. It can be evolutionary, doesn't need to be revolutionary, and it's something that I think manifests itself in the approach that you took, or the D8 took, with the design here. So it'd be interesting if you could touch on that approach in terms of the logo, the most obvious core part of the identity, but then how that then applies. How did you go about bringing that energy to bear across the broader identity?
Yeah, of course. And I know that on your screens now, you'll be looking at kind of how we then work with the brand across a number of different elements to make it up. So a brand, yes, it's maybe the biggest visual representation of it is a logo, but it is also made up of a suite of component parts. So we look at all of those in the context of that stay sharp payoff. So when we start to move through and look at how we take the input and apply it to the logo, we see that essentially we were looking at the Bnr logo and it is iconic. There's a lot of good that comes with having such a strong icon in the yellow and black, the use of colour. The microphone is very representative of what goes on, so it's kind of obvious, but in a good way. Functionally though, given the kind of scale and the way that the logo is made up, it means that from a kind of a practical point of view, when used at small sizes, it means that the Bnr in the logo came quite small, and it means that it's kind of hard to sometimes see the lettering in the microphone, and it didn't give you that flexibility that we needed to build. So we worked on a lot of different options of the logo to develop them, and actually it wasn't part of the first brief, was it?
I told you not to touch the mic.
What did you do?
No, we touched the mic.
Yeah. So I think that what we wanted to do was to take the elements that made it iconic and keep those and build on those. And we did push in a few different places. We looked at really simplifying the logo. So how would it work if we kind of removed the element in the middle and kept just two component parts? But it felt like there was a lot of that just took it a tiny bit too far away. So we had some really interesting discussions in our meetings, and again, I think it brings us back to this idea of collaboration, that we have the elements that you see on your screen here. These are some of the iterations that we went through, and we also kind of looked at removing the handle of the microphone as well. And it was a lovely meeting that we're in, because it's not just kind of a linear project where we go and sit in a room and then that's it. We go to Dan and then you pick one and that's it. And simplification is it's something that's happening an awful lot with brands now, and we didn't want to just necessarily follow a trend, but it's about conversations like we had, and we talked about, okay, well actually the handle to that microphone that's all about people.
Yeah.
And it just hit the nail on the head for, okay, this is where we need to stay, and this is what's really important in the logo that we keep.
Yeah, it really stands for what we do, and it's an object, you know, the microphone, and not a scaled down or abstract form of a microphone, but the actual microphone stands for people interviewing or being interviewed. And I think that's the essence of what we do at Bnr. We talk to people and we ask them questions, and you do that with a mic, and that mic needs to be held in a hand.
Yeah.
And that's what when the penny dropped, and you know, we didn't waste time, but yeah.
Oh, but that's a part of it that I think should never be unturned either, because what we want to make sure that we do in partnership with you is that every decision that we make should have a really strong rationale, and it should lead back to the stay sharp principle. And so the more that we can do that and explore and show you different options, it means that hopefully when we reach the end of the process, you feel as comfortable as we do in explaining why everything's been done. And also, you know, if there are people who challenge or question, you always have something to talk to them about, which I think is really, really important.
Yeah.
It feels like there is you mentioned earlier on about collaborating, and that feels, I think it comes across quite powerfully, that this wasn't a client agency, two sides thing. It does feel that it has been quite collaborative.
Yeah.
Did that then, you mentioned there have been 3 stages, so when you moved into the 3rd stage, did that continue to be the case?
Yeah, absolutely. So we kind of tend to go from research to creating the elements, and then when we activate them, that's really when you start to test it. So and that's really the exciting part, because it means that we push our thinking that's been quite contained in a kind of process-driven form to really, okay, well, how is this going to be used? And that's it's a good time, an even better time for collaboration, because you have to make decisions on, okay, well, how far can we push this? It's new, so we don't want to throw everything out, but at the same time, we have to make sure that this works on a tiny, tiny scale onto kind of up into studios or, you know, the outdoor advertising, things like that. So I think that what's quite nice about that, and I still think it kind of has a focus on innovation, is that it's about just pushing the boundaries a little bit further to make sure that the brand then works in any medium that it needs to go in.
Okay.
Yeah, so it needs to work now, but it also needs to work, I don't know, hopefully 5-10 years from now.
Yeah.
So it needs to kind of tag along with whatever we have in mind, and hopefully it's future-proof, but we don't know that yet, obviously. But yeah, I think that's also, it's flexible enough, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting then. So I think we've gone through those sort of three phases of the design process, but it does feel like that the underpinning objective and desire it hasn't been to we didn't enter this project wanting to rebrand because you wanted to rebrand. It was more about
No, yeah, well, we didn't want to rebrand at all, because the assignment was not to touch the mic. And I think we took the brand a step further, like what you said visually. Like you said, innovation doesn't necessarily need to be revolution. It can be evolution as well. And I think we didn't want to change for the sake of changing. Change is not a means, it's a means to an end. And I think the reason why we did this is to connect better with what we stand for, what our core values are. So to kind of get rid of that disconnect, and also how can we create more impact in a changing ecosystem with now also, you know, video and digital motion possibilities entering that playing field. So it needs to, the innovation, as far as we're concerned, is about how can we create impact, how can we stay alive, and how can we hopefully strive and grow from there. So it's not the change for the sake of changing.
Yeah. So it's almost like you've gone, like, change has been done for a purpose.
And, definitely.
Actually, it's more from the requirements rather than just the desire to do so.
Yeah.
I think then I like the idea of keeping this theme of threes then. So if we were to try and think of three sort of takeaways maybe that we could leave.
Are we already wrapping up?
Time flies.
Yeah.
For our audience, and maybe we could just have a bit of a discussion around these. But I think that what comes through very clearly, and Rosie mentioned this about BNR as an organisation, I think it comes across in the people that we've dealt with, but also the output of the organisation, that everything really comes from a place of you know what you stand for. So is there anything that you think either from your side of as being the client marketer or from the agency that the importance of that as a guiding principle?
No, definitely. And I think that's the core of what at Bnr we stand for. That's been alive, those core values and staying sharp and cutting the crap, that's been part of our DNA. And we call it, we have yellow blood or yellow heart.
Trousers.
Trousers, yeah, thank you. That's been with us for 24 years. And sometimes we kind of drift away from that, but there are always people, whether it being one of the founders or in really putting us in our place, new people entering, people coming up with new ideas. There's always that need to do that, to get the news, whether it be in copy, online, in podcasting, or through our app. Knowing what we stand for, that's basically it. And I think we have a really strong identity because we know that. That's why people love us. We are, I'm not going to say we are a love brand, but people are really loyal and committed and are friends of Bnr, what we do. And I think that sets us apart from other news outlets that are out there. I would see people walking around with a Bnr or I Heart Bnr t-shirt, and maybe not so much from other news outlets. But and that's because we know what we stand for, and so does our audience. More people could know that, and that's also up to us to create that. Yeah.
And I think it's important to mention also that the kind of rebranding or looking at the brand in any way is as important for people within Bnr as it is outside. And I think you touched on earlier, it was good for you to take part in the workshops and look at those processes, because actually in organisations that are so busy and that are moving at such speed, it's quite hard to stop sometimes and really take stock of things. And actually what we hope to do with the rebrand, just as much as communicate everything that you do to the outside world, it's to make everybody really proud inside of the brand that they work for, and remind them of all of these things that you stand for, and hopefully kind of express that in a clearer, kind of more exciting way, I think.
Yeah.
Well, that probably leads us on nicely to the second point. I think that we had discussed being a bit of a takeaway here, and it's been a theme throughout of innovation being a theme, but our take on that being that it needn't necessarily be completely revolutionary, and it can be an evolution. It feels like that might be something that would be almost a better, an easier sell to an internal audience. You're not just ripping up. No. Ripping up and starting again, that potentially, did you find that doing this in a more evolutionary way helped you to bring colleagues and existing staff members with you?
Yeah, I think so. But what really helped is, and that's maybe not so relevant for the audience out there, for the world out there, but internally it helps to explain the why. So the rationale is really important, because if you explain that, they get it, and then there's almost no discussion. Yeah. Doesn't mean that there weren't any discussions, because there were, and that was also really good. It held us. We were sharp in going into those discussions. But it is. you know, it wouldn't be the first time that a new marketing manager joined the company and told, you know, had an idea of we need to change everything, new logo, new branding, what have you. But I think because the initial brief was we're going to stick with this yellow mic, I think that says it all, because it is been with us for so long and so strong. Yeah, so, you know, I'm all for a revolution as long as it makes sense and it adds value. And I don't think changing our identity completely, you know, we're not going to be working with a pink mic. That doesn't add any value to us. Yeah.
That's perhaps a good point at which to wrap up on. That final sort of takeaway that I've taken from what you've just said there was the combination of look forward, but embrace and look at what you already have as well. So combining a forward, future-looking approach, but then also with remembering what past, what heritage you have as a brand. That's been a really interesting conversation, certainly from my perspective. I don't know how the audience have found that, but thanks very much for your time.
Thank you. I have one more thing to ask the audience out there, is to vote your podcast for the Dutch Podcast Awards. So if you go to podcastawards.nl, you can nominate your favorite podcast.
Your favorite BNR podcast?
No, it can be BNR, can be a competitor. I don't mind, as long as you put your vote out there. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.